be on this Monday night halaqa looking primarily at a text that's called the Book of Assistance by a religious scholar, Imam Al-Haddad, rahimahullah, who is known as a real spiritual master of our tradition. And the idea with this is that we're going to look to deepen our relationship just with kind of our own inward development, right? A lot of challenges that we have in terms of our day-to-day development of a relationship with God tends to be rooted, I would say, in a start and stop at just things that are externals, ritual, practice, do's and don'ts. But there's so much more to Islam as a religion that definitely incorporates those ritualistic elements, but also has facets to it that are a little more than that. So, what I want you to do, and one of the things that we're going to do, I'd ask you to do two things. One, that you bring a notebook with you so that we can actually write, right? You're going to, statistically, you just learn more and memorize more, but able to relate to concepts more if you're writing in some capacity. And two, that you're just ready to be able to talk to people around you, right? That we don't want to take a front facing mode of interaction, that there's one person who essentially is telling you that absolutely this is what your religion means only, but for us to be able to hear and listen to each other and to gain from each other's insights and perspectives on things. And so in a bit, I'm going to kind of start an introduction. We're going to look at conceptually what the term Ihsan means, that quite often gets associated with spirituality. But what I'd like for you all to start off with is just turning to the people around you. If you guys want to come in also, so you're not kind of sitting on your own. If you want to turn to just a couple of people around you, ours is not a religion that necessarily separates certain elements the way that certain terms get separated, right? So I'd like for you to talk to each other and just kind of discuss what's the relationship between religion, spirituality, and you can even throw a third term in there, ethics. But primarily the relationship between religion and spirituality. What do these words mean to you? How do they relate to one another? And then we'll come back and kind of discuss as a group. Make sense? So as people trickle in, also just introduce yourself to new people that are sitting around you. It's good to know the names of the people that you're kind of in community with, that you're growing with, that you're building with. And so if you could turn to the persons next to you, ideally in pairs, a group of three is fine. And, what do these terms mean? Religion, spirituality, how do they relate to each other? And then we'll kind of come back and discuss. Go ahead. Oh, this is saying that the chat function is disabled. You're saying on Zoom, a regular chat is disabled. Can you see if you can mess around with the settings? Yeah, I just asked them to write their thoughts and ideas in, but somebody wrote back saying that the chat function is disabled. We can't change it, it's not a problem. No, I changed. Yeah. No, they can chat with me. Yes. You take a seat. You can come. You can come sit here. You can come wherever you want. Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the things that we're talking about? How do we understand these terms? Do they relate to each other in any way? What do you think? What did you discuss? Yeah.
So we sort of felt that like spirituality is almost related to like the fitra, right? Which is like the innate disposition to like believe in a higher power, believe in a creator, things like that. That's like what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions as well. But religion is sort of like directing that energy in like an organized way. So for example, the organized religions, right? Islam being obviously one of them. So yeah, you can be like spiritual but not religious. But if you're like actually religious, you are usually like spiritual as well. So it's kind of like
Okay. What else? Yeah.
Also, we're just talking about the fact that like spirituality is like our connection, like with God, our relationship with God, and religion is maybe like the bridge, like the way to strengthen the relationship and like the way to uplift, like that relationship.
Yeah.
Maybe religion could the tools to make spirituality happen. With that, relationship. I think it also the point of part of the point of Islam to me is also connecting with the people who are also going down that journey. I think that's a big part of it. Like spirituality is individualized and religion is more communal.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts? Were you gonna say something? Are you trying to hide? Does anybody in this general area sense as I'm pointing? Yes, no. So in our tradition, there's a lot that's written on this. And just to give kind of a quick overview before we start looking at the text, we have Islam, which is the name of the religion. But then we have facets to it that we want to be able to understand, right? There's Islam, which is equated to practice. There's Iman, which is rooted in theology and belief. And then there's this word Ihsan, which some would translate as spirituality, but it's essentially a relationship between the outer and the inward. And so you want to be able to start to relate to your religion holistically as something that's not just like mechanics, but to understand it in a multidimensional way. And this thing of ihsan, we're going to break down etymologically in a bit, but how these things relate to each other are very important. What most of us have is just this practice, do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs. We have like fiqh, we have externals, and most of what we have isn't even in its entirety. You don't have to know things until you need to know them. But likely, most of you in this room don't know the rulings of like zakah, for example, or a charity that's obligatory. Right? You probably don't know how to do hajj. You don't have to know how to do hajj until you're doing it. So it's not a like good or bad thing. But what we have, if anything, is quite often just rooted in this prism, right, of mechanics. This is what you're kind of brought up with. This is how you read the Arabic of the Quran. This is how you perform your wudu. This is the mechanics of prayers. When you have just one dimension of anything, regardless of what it is going to have a very simplistic perspective, because anything that's one dimensional is just going to look like a very straight line, right? So here is what it looks like. That's what this is, vision. And this is going to be a key part of understanding Ihsan, because it's going to be rooted in our ability to see things in certain ways. What our tradition then does is it adds a second prism to this that we can interject now in terms of this theology and belief, Iman. When you go from one dimension to two, you go from something that's like this to now something that has shape to it. The line becomes a rectangle, becomes a diamond, becomes a square. But you can draw more meaning from it, because if I said to you, what does this mean? It doesn't really mean so much. But now if I said to you individually, what does this mean? You can start to extrapolate more from it just because it now looks different to you, right? Does that make sense? Then what Islam adds as a religion is this third dimension of Ihsan. And this is what brings depth or volume to something, right? That it allows for you to understand that pretty much everything can be seen on 360 degrees of perspective on almost an infinite number of planes. So where I stand in front of you right now, not any one of you, if you were to stand up and walk to where I am, would walk in the same steps exactly as somebody else. And not any one of you also sees me exactly the same as anybody else sees me, right? Doesn't mean that you see me wrong or right. You are just seeing from your vantage point. With the husn, the inner spiritual state of the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, allowed for him to do, was to see something the way that he saw it, but to also understand why others would see it the way that they saw it without him having to become them, right? That's what this beauty is. Does that make sense? And so that's what we want to be able to take. We want to be able to bring depth to perspective. We want to be able to not just be simplistic or reductive or what's most apparent. This is a problem. This is what the world functions in. It can't see you as bigger than the color of your skin. It can't see you bigger than how it is that you dress or you don't dress, right? It can't find beauty in things. If we were to give a definition to spirituality as a baseline definition of what we're going to be doing here, spirituality is the mode through which you draw meaning from the environment around you. Does that make sense? You're trying to get understanding, comprehension, all these words that get thrown at you, purpose, meaning. This is what it's about. It's about to get a little bit deeper. Do you see? To see things as actual signs that are pointing towards something. And to not be in a place where beauty gets kind of devoid of our life circumstances. Within the prism of modernity, this is a challenge that comes up. We have in the Quran in Surah Al-Balad a verse that says, "Alam naj'al lahu 'aynayn," that we made like humans with two eyes. And in the most literal sense, you have two eyes on your face, right? In a more esoteric sense, what this is referring to is not just the vision of two eyes outwardly, but a vision that is both outward and inward. There's a character in our eschatological genres of hadith that's called Dajjal. Who's Dajjal? Does anybody know? Nobody? Who's Dajjal?
The Antichrist is going to come and fight the Imam Mahdi.
Yeah. Dajjal's bad guy. Allah protect us from his fitna. One of the depictions of Dajjal, who is an individual that comes at the end of time, is that he will have one eye. Not two eyes, but one eye. And again, with a recognition of this in the more sense of an esoteric understanding, that this creature that comes at the end of time, being one-eyed, but we are meant to be two-eyed, vision outward and inward, that with modernity, towards the end of time, people will lose a depth of perspective. You're going to only be able to see in one direction, either outward or inward, but as Muslims, you're supposed to see both, not limited in some capacity. Does that make sense? Your ability to be able to now draw meaning and deepen in meaning necessitates being able to embrace this. The word ihsan itself has the etymological root of beauty to it. And so its root letters are ha, sin, and nun, which denote beauty. But there's a lot of different ways to say beauty in Arabic, right? One of the words you can say as beauty is jamal. How do you say camel in Arabic? Jamal. What's the relationship between a camel and the word beautiful? Why is the word for camel in Arabic share the root of beauty? What makes a camel beautiful? Huh? It's humps? Maybe. Did you ever look at a camel and be like, those are some beautiful humps on that camel? What else? What else is like a pronounced feature of a camel? Its eyes, its neck. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you what it is before we get into awkward conversations on parts of the body we don't want to mention. Right? The most pronounced feature of a camel that relates to Jamal is the camels have these very unique noses. Right? And this was something that in certain Arab cultures was seen as a sign of beauty. And so that relates to a particular part of that creature. Does that make sense? Husn is a beauty that is related to the eye. It has that relationship to beauty. You see what I mean? And so a lot of this is going to be based off of how you see things. And for you to get to a place where that inward introspection is rooted in a willingness to confront parts of myself that I might not really know how or why I landed there, but it's time for me to be able to feel a different contentment through my practice of faith. Does this make sense so far? So what we're going to do and what this text does is it creates a roadmap, a trajectory that enables us to now get to a place where we're deepening in our spiritual growth. I went for Hajj in 2019. And have any of you ever been for Hajj before? Has anybody ever you went for Hajj? When did you go? 2018? How was it? That's nice, right? Yeah, it's a nice thing, Hajj. Yeah, try it out sometime. When I went in 2019 for Hajj, it was really majestic as an experience. It rained pretty much everywhere. It rained in Mecca, it rained in Medina, it rained in Mina, and it even rained on the day of Arafah. If you know anything about Hajj, one of the integral components to the Hajj pilgrimage, right? It's an obligation that if you have the means to do so once in your life, you go on this pilgrimage to Mecca. May Allah make us those who fulfill our obligations. And so, if you know anything, the plain of Arafah, the day of Arafah, the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, it's the day before Eid al-Adha. It's an integral part of the Hajj. You got to stand in Arafah on this giant plain. And there's literally millions of people all in the same ihram clothing, white sheets, white gowns. If you've seen pictures of it, it's really remarkable to see. And what essentially takes place is that you just stand and you stand in prayer. Can we move up a little bit? So as people come in, they can still pray behind us. You can come in this way too. And so we're in this place of Arafah. There's a lot of commotion, a lot of noise. Hashmi, can you close that? You can just move it to the side. Yeah. And it starts to rain in Arafah. And all of this noise and everybody talking suddenly stops. And everybody turns in the direction of the Kaaba because nobody wants to miss out on this blessed opportunity. And it felt like with every drop of rain hitting the roof of every tent on this day of Arafah, Allah was affirming the acceptance of another dua and another dua and another dua. And when it was all done and we were getting ready to move to the next part of the Hajj, there was a young man who was in our group who said to me, I need to go refreshen my wudu. Can you come with me? I said, sure. We went together. And as we left from this place, there was an elderly man. I want you to picture in your head someone as old as your grandfather. He's standing now and he had just washed up and made wudu. And as he was drying off, he didn't only take off the top part of his ihram, but also the bottom part of his ihram. And when men are wearing ihram for Hajj or Umrah, they don't wear anything underneath it, no clothes. And so he's standing without any clothing on in now this place of Arafah. There's not millions of people looking at him, but hundreds are in that area that we were standing in. And some people were gathered like this, just staring profusely. Some were looking with disgust. Some were like yelling at him. Some were yelling at each other, saying, why are you yelling at this man? Some were laughing and pointing. And the young man that was with me said to me, you take off the top of your ihram. I'm going to take off the top of mine. Let's go give him some privacy. And I made dua to Allah saying that, Ya Allah, give me a heart that's like this. A heart that sees what everybody else sees, but sees it differently. Do you get what I'm saying? These are literally people who went on pilgrimage. They have, many of them performed Umrah on that pilgrimage. They're in Ihram. They're standing in the rain after they just stood at the day of Arafah. What made this guy see it differently? How did he see what everyone else saw, but didn't see it the same way? Do you get what I mean? That's what this comes down to. A vision, a perspective that enables you to recognize how you see things is telling you a lot about yourself. And where and how you can navigate exercise, practice, theory that allows for you to have a deeper relationship with your faith so that you can walk through this plane of existence and everything doesn't just feel ugly all the time, where everything is just about facing and chasing superficial beauty. You can start to see beauty in the people around you. You can start to see beauty in the world around you. You can allow for yourself to also be audacious enough to embrace your own beauty. You don't have to put your trust then and seek validation from external variables that are rooted in simply just materialistic gain and the acquisition of things as such. But a sense of contentment starts to come from within. You got to want it, right? I want to see the world the way that guy saw it. I don't want to see it in the ways that these other people were seeing it. I want to be able to find that meaning. That's what spirituality is. The ability to find meaning in the environment around you. That you're able to take things as signposts. You see them as actual ayat. You allow for yourself to be in a place where you recognize that this has the opportunity for me to deepen in a sense of recognition, that I'm not a body simply that traverses this earth. I have so much more to me than what that is. There's a heart that beats deeply within me. There's a ruh, a spirit. There's an entire self that I have that I can engage in now in meaningful understanding and practice that would allow for me to be able to take on challenges, to deal with stress. The idea is to not pretend like life doesn't get difficult, but have a vision modifier that enables me to now be able to see it a little bit differently. When the Prophet ﷺ defines this word in the hadith, there's a hadith that's called the Hadith Jibra'il, where the angel Gabriel comes and he engages the messenger, peace be upon him, directly. There's a lot that goes into the narration. You could Google it. But essentially, the companions don't know who he is. He comes, he's dressed in very pristine clothing. His hair looks like it's just been washed. He's in this space where nobody knows and recognizes him by his face. And he's just walking around in a desert in this very pristine way. It's strange. He then comes, the narration says, and he's sitting knee to knee with the messenger of God, which is something that people didn't do out of deference. And then it says he puts his hands on his thighs. And that can either mean that he put it on his own legs as he sat down like this, or he put his hand on the leg of the Prophet ﷺ. Again, it's all really random things that people weren't doing typically at that time. And then he asks different questions, the angel Jibra'il, of the Prophet. And he says, what is Islam? The Prophet gives him, like ritual and practice, right? That you make the Shahada, that you perform your prayers, you fast Ramadan, you give your charity, you make pilgrimage. He asks, what is Iman? And he gives articles of faith, belief in Allah and His angels, His messengers, His books, the last day, Qadr, the good of it, the bad of it, predestination. Then he asks him this thing of Ihsan. He says, what is Ihsan, right? Akhbirni an al-Ihsan. Like, give me the news. What is Ihsan? And the Prophet says, An ta'budullaha ka'annaka tarah, that you worship Allah as if you see Him. But you understand that although you cannot see Him, that He sees you. It goes back to vision. It goes back to perspective. Do you get what I mean? These words in Arabic are verbal nouns. They exist in a fourth form grammatically. There's 15 forms that it can take. So it's a doing word, right? You are doing Islam. You are doing Iman. You are doing Ihsan. There's an active mode of engagement to it. You can rotely memorize your ritual and practice. I can say to you, how do you make wudu? Most of you could probably tell me, right? Even if you can't remember, because it's gotten so mechanical, because you've done it so many times, that it's just something you got to think for a second. Wait, do I do this first or do I do that first? But you're not using your conscious. You don't have to. You can just memorize and engage that. You can rotely memorize also theology, principles of theology. Ihsan is not a science that you learn in that way. It's like an experiential knowledge. It's something that has to embrace the paradox that the way that you learn about yourself is through yourself. Do you get what I mean? But the starting point of it is that husn is rooted to a vision, a perspective, a beauty attached to the eye. You see what I mean? Okay. What I want to do is ask you all to turn to each other now for a couple of minutes. What are some of the things you're taking away? What are some of the things that you're pulling from this so far? There's more people that have trickled in. Ask people their names. Introduce yourselves to others. We're going to be standing to pray together. You all should stay for iftar. We're going to have iftars every Monday night, inshallah. And we're going to try to have iftars on Thursdays if people are coming out for Monday. Even if you ain't fast today, you can still eat food. It's okay, right? There's more barakah when we eat together, right? We want to get into the habit of doing that. And so I want you to turn to each other. And what was it that's coming up for you so far? What are some of the things you're taking away? And then we'll come back and discuss, and then we'll start to look at the book for a little bit. Okay? Yeah. So introduce yourselves, takeaways, and then we'll come back and discuss.
Yeah.
It's a lot of reading. When you say grad school, and so the people that you were the one so you're just here for a second. When did you get I feel like when you really take more perspective out of teaching how you never think of the dream. So I guess also listen to it also it's like
Did Russell go to get the food?
You can just like wait people okay, this person like 3 dimensions like so like then okay I like I can be right because like yeah so like so so then just but like so I'm saying like yeah like but like other than listening yeah like this conversation like maybe I'm here so this person has to do like get there you might have it okay maybe it's still an excellent year paper but like years that year maybe I'm here but like I do but like this is good for me so maybe I did this to get this I have my phone and just say a line back like to only one line comes back
what's your look at
What did you say? It sounded like you said something.
Oh no, I was just saying that like when you think of like in many dimensions, like you start thinking ranking people for like companies in this world that being more focused on growth. It's like like maybe someone may be better at this than you, but like you may be good at this and like people can do with different things.
My friend actually, maybe they're not excelling on other skills. You know what I mean? Don't they really see like the one skill, which is like the skill? Only ever see the one skill.
Yeah. Like in time, why you try like the third layer engineers like everyone doing just like everything. It's not say you're something only doing with their class. It's not really making money. Like compared to the past, how many like yeah, literally. So that's just like
you can say like in different directions but this thing is the same
yeah, and then something else I know for because like there may just be down exponentially, because everyone was listening to this story about the like the marketing. So like literally this guy like so like the other thing that everyone that says they have the marketing like they're listening at the pretty white because like the marketing is stuff like who is like the who is and I think it's like just one way to start taking this spiritual and I think it's the newspaper is what like right like that
Okay, what are some of the things we're taking away? What are some of the things that come up for you in the course of this? Who wants to start? What did you talk about in your groups? What are some of the things? What do you think? Right? We want to get to a place too where we're able to be comfortable in sharing our thoughts. So just to set some kind of understandings and guidelines around that, you don't want to compel yourself to only speak when you feel like what you're saying is absolutely correct. And your silence shouldn't be rooted in an avoidance of saying what's completely wrong. Right? We would want to get comfortable in being able to engage our own religious growth by understanding that we can have ideas, we can have thoughts, we can have opinions. For the rest of us, as we listen, you want to just give your attention to whoever's talking. It's not easy to speak in front of this many people, let alone about a topic that ironically is so central to our identity, but we can quite often be afraid to discuss it, right? That's like a trick of shaitan to get you to be in a place where you're afraid to speak about what your faith means to you, you know? And so you don't want to jump to just remedy or correct or say, no, this is wrong or that's wrong, right? And so allow for yourself to just give people space. When you're talking, you can make I statements, right? So we're not unnecessarily excluding people with a we that we might not all necessarily fit into. Does that make sense? So what do we talk about in our groups? Who wants to start? Yeah.
Also, we were talking about the fact that, like, looking at, like this thing, like in 3 dimension, like all of it's like to expand on many more things, because when you just look at it on 1 dimension, it that means you can rank people. Okay, this person is better than me. This person is a better Muslim. But like when you look at it in like 2, 3 dimension, and also allow like for like for others like possibilities, because like maybe someone may do better like on the x-axis than me, but like I'm endowed with other things, like so like we have different like growth lines, and like so like and even when we think of that, like we can also appreciate our difference and like work together to get better, and stop comparing ourselves and just focusing on what matters.
Yeah. All of the parts to it, each dimension is important because if you remove any of them, it then can have the danger of going back to just that simplistic one dimension. If I only have Ihsan, if I only have Iman, if I only have Islam, right? It has to all kind of work in tandem together. This is what our religion does. It gives you something to do, right? There's practice, Islam. It gives you something to believe in. That's Iman. It gives you something to embody, right? To kind of live, so to speak. That's ihsan. And that hadith, the hadith Jibreel, ends with a conversation around, the end of time, the last day. So it's giving you something to get ready for, right? There's 4 different elements to this. Do you know what I mean? What else? What else do we talk about in terms of takeaways? Yeah.
I think we all kind of talked about, like, for me in particular, when you had mentioned how a lot, when like you think about him, but he's almost thinking about you as well. Like it's a two-way kind of situation. And so, like, even when it comes to spirituality, even the idea of like when you wake up and you immediately think of Allah, or like just your relationship with Allah and the fact that He's watching you affects the way that you move in the world in general.
Yeah.
And just like it being like the start to a relationship with spirituality, I feel like starts with the question of like, who is Allah? Like getting to know Him beyond just the routine of it all, of the entire religion. Like, who is the one that we worship?
Yep.
And so, like, asking that particular question, I feel like is a form of spirituality because it's something that's repeatedly shown throughout our lives.
Yeah. And that's what it is. All of it's going to necessitate this very subjective understanding. So to worship Allah is if you see Him, and if you cannot see Him, you know that He sees you. Meaning that that person is impacting vision. Did you get all that stuff by yourself?
No, I had to help her.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay. Thank you.
Vasila is very strong. She carried 10 trays on her own, mashallah. Make special dua for her. That's the food we're eating for Iftar. Everybody's going to stay to eat, right? because we want to eat together, we want to get to know each other and spend that time with each other. We'll need some people to help us just serving the food after Maghrib. But back to this. The understanding of who the divine is to you is going to play a deep impact on then how you perceive some of this. And when we get into this first chapter, it's going to come back to it. So you want to remember this, right? The God that you believe God to be is the God that you will then worship. And so if you believe in a God that's an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to punish you, that's who you then believe God to be. If you believe in a God that believes in you more than you believe in yourself, a God that's not just watching you, but watching over you, the one that sustains you, provides for you, the one that heals you, it's going to make a categorical difference in how this plays itself out. Maybe we can get one more person or two more people. What were some of your takeaways? Yeah.
It's also even just like moving forward and then having like the foresight afterwards, when something happens, and have like time to reflect and to see like now you can think about what happened, you can realize, you can say, okay, these people should have done this or that, but come up with it and there is kind of outside of that sphere. Like I think that I really like
Great. Yeah. You has your hand raised too. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about spiritual growth, and it requires a sense of self mindfulness. We began also learn just the okay, there's a way I want to do this something that I admire in others and emulate. I have to look within and really practice that. Even we mentioned people, how often we have like a person things that we really like it because that's what society or people around us how us react. And we should focus more on our second aspect. It's like, oh no, it's you know, I want to react to more jobs, more positivity, and then just keep that in mind every time something happens and eventually.
Yeah. Hussein is rooted in beauty. So the idea isn't to see in a way that makes you a jerk, right? The idea is to recognize that the husn of the Prophet ﷺ was what made him a person of kindness, a person of mercy, a person of compassion, where he then greets people that he knows and he does not know, right? These are practices that are going to, in and of themselves, lend you to become also balanced inwardly, which then will allow for you to just be a better human at the end of the day, right? Because nobody wants to be a jerk. You know what I mean? Does anybody want to be a jerk? No, right? Yeah. You're the only one that was shaking his head. Congratulations. Room of terrible people. No, but you don't want to get stuck in a place where you forget who your teacher is. Your teacher, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is not teaching you that you compromise on ethics. Your teacher is not telling you that all of these issues are somebody else's problem. But when you can see the world through beauty, you then think about, okay, what does this really mean? And it's not going to be as hard for me to go volunteer at a hospital or use my credentials and my skills to build a hospital. And when you have that sense of inward beauty that is impacting perception, you don't just see things in that way, but you see yourself and you see others. We're sitting in a room right now that has immense talent in it. And it gets stifled because you can't get past just that one-dimensional Islam. You see? And we can find strength through religion, and then you can find strength through community, and you can see what's going on with other people for who they actually are. What you can build is remarkable. Some things that we want to think about, terminologies that are going to come up quite often. So you're going to have the word for body, which is your physical body, is badan or jasad. This is your physical self. The word for the word qalb means your spiritual heart. You have what's called the aql, or intellect. but this is an intellectual capacity that is nuanced. So it's an intellect that has the ability to discern right from wrong. It's going to impact your decisions. And it's not a moral relativism. It's a goodness and badness that's rooted in like God's conveyance to you of what's good and bad. You have what's called irada. And this is just your sheer will and determination. You have what's called the nafs. And this is the lower self, the ego. And this gives you an overarching understanding of who you are, a frame of who you are. Does that make sense? Yeah, these are terms that are going to come up. Okay, before Maghrib comes in about 10 minutes or so, I want us to just open the book and start to read it. So if you got a smartphone, you can just PDF the Book of Assistance, Imam Al-Haddad, and it'll pop up. And somebody can pull it up and go to the first chapter. That's on certainty. Does anybody have it? You want to read?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
There's start from the top.
Yeah.
Uncertainty. You must, beloved brother, strengthen and improve your certainty. For when certainty prevails in the heart and establishes itself therein, the unseen becomes as if seen, and the man aided by providence says, as Ali radiallahu anh, may God ennoble his face, said, were the cover to be removed, I would not increase in certainty. Certainty, do I stop or just keep going?
No, you can stop. So, first paragraph. Imam Al-Haddad, he starts with yaqeen, certitude. We're going to get into this chapter a lot more in detail, but there's certain things that I'm going to ask you to do between this week and next week that are going to be really important. Why do you think he starts with certitude? What's he doing when he gives you this? For those who aren't here, what we said that this book is, it's got very concise chapters, a page, 2 pages. It creates now a roadmap for an individual that is seeking to go on a process of developing themselves spiritually. So what would be the idea of in chapter 1, starting with certainty? Yeah. It's the foundation of tawakkul. Great. What else? It's a book. It's like a how-to book, right? It's instructive. Yeah. You had your hand raised.
No, it's the reference, the existence of Allah.
Yeah. Anything else? He's telling you where you're headed, right? When you start the book, what he's giving you is not your starting point. He's giving you your destination. Why does he do that?
So you don't have doubts.
You don't have doubts? Who is saying? Yeah. Who has to get there? Okay. But you, right? Me. So how would I have a starting point that's generic enough to be applicable to the diversity in this room, let alone billions of people that have been Muslim, trillions over 14 centuries of lived existence? He can't tell you where to start because all of us don't start in the same place. But he's giving you a common goal or destination because you can gauge where you are in relation to that. You see what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? So that same notion, what we were saying when we started, that if all of you were to get up and just walk here, none of you would walk in the exact same steps because all of you are seated in different places. Your starting points are different. That's why the path looks different. This religion has so much rooted in movement, right? The word Sharia, it means a path to the watering well. The word Sirah, that is for the prophetic biographies also a pathway, right? The word tariqa, which is a spiritual path. They all are about pathways. It's about movement. You're kind of going in different directions. It's not a religion that's about being still or being the same or being stuck, which sometimes feels a lot worse than even taking steps back. Because even if you took a step backward, you can then create a different vantage point for yourself in terms of what's ahead. But if you are exactly the same day after day after day, you're not doing what is the kind of fundamental premise of this faith, that you embrace movement and you move. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? So what I need for everybody to do, one, is you got to commit to being on this journey, right? Individually. You come here because we're not gonna get as deep as we can if we're not hearing from each other, right? And you sitting with somebody and talking things out with them is going to bring something to you, but you're bringing something to them. And then when we hear back from you, it's going to do something. Two, this is something that unfortunately gets left behind a lot, right? There's like messages everywhere that are just teaching people how to make wudu. And they're stuck in the bathroom for years, right? You know how to make wudu. You don't know how to make wudu, we'll teach you how to make wudu. You know what I mean? But we want to get to parts of our religion that are going to allow for us, right? Do you want to be racist? No, you don't. But people who are not seeing the world from their heart, they can't see people. And it's not about seeing people bigger than their race, but seeing beauty in their race. Do you see the difference? You got to want the latter in order to do what it is that you're seeking to achieve. And so what I want you to do is read this first chapter. It's really short. It's not long. It doesn't even have to make sense to you. Just read it. And then take a day or two and then read it again later. But we're getting a destination point. I want you to, as best as you can, assess for yourself, where are you at? Getting a recognition of me, right? This is me. And this is not meant to be an exercise in self-deprecation. Do not give shaitan victory over you. You want to reflect on yourself, contemplate on yourself, get into a place where you know your starting point. It's not meant to be a lonely journey. You literally have a room full of people that are going to walk through this with you, right? So you got to just think a little bit. And that's what a big part of this is. Imam Al-Haddad, whose book we're reading, we're going to get to a chapter on fiqh, reflection, contemplation, where he says essentially that reflection is the lamp of the heart. When it departs from it, there's no light left in it, right? So you find moments of stillness. You sit down and think. Your individual growth is going to be about not honesty, but vulnerability. So to say, I want to get to a place, and we're going to go through multiple chapters that give us outlines of various things that will help us get to that space of certitude. You got to know where you're actually at. This becomes a hard conversation. Don't want to talk to anybody. Make some friends at iftar today, right? Go and talk to others, not in superficial ways. Not the place to have a conversation that's only about what do you do? What do you study, right? You are so much bigger than that. Do you get what I mean? You don't want to talk to people about things that are hard. You come talk to some of us. I'm happy to sit with you and we can go through a process where we can think about some of these things, but you want to actively do it, right? It's not something that you want to sit as a pastime, entertainment, but to start to see the role you play on the cultivation of your own spirituality, on the cultivation of your own relationship with God. Does that make sense? Any thoughts or questions before I make a few announcements? Yeah. The book? The book that we're reading in the class? Yeah. It's called the Book of Assistance. Yeah. The first chapter it's uncertainty, as it's called. This in Arabic, the word for certitude is yaqeen. Right? Anybody? Yeah. Make sense? Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Yeah. I don't know what we're going to do over the next few months. As like Maghrib gets earlier, we want to do iftar. If you have the physical capacity to fast, you should try to fast. For those who don't have the physical capacity, like our tradition teaches us, Allah rewards you for your intention in it. But you should try to fast because anybody in our community historically that was serious about their spiritual state and their spiritual diet, they were smart about their consumption and they had a regular fast in their practice. You know what I mean? The days are going to get super short, right? In a couple of months, Maghrib's going to be at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, it's not going to be a long fast. You start to build a relationship with it, it's going to be helpful to you. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? We're going to do iftar here on Mondays. Likely at some point we'll have to figure out. And I would love your feedback on this because I don't have a problem talking, but one of the things that I want us to be on the same page with is whether we want to continue after Maghrib as we like eat and people want to sit, or we want to have a hard stop. And then for the next couple of weeks, it's going to kind of be a little shorter before then it kind of gets back to a reasonable length. Yeah. So just as we experience it, you let me know. Because when I ask questions, I want actual like answers. I'm not asking rhetorically. You don't have to feed my ego, right? So you can tell me like, no, this needs to stop at Maghrib, and we don't want to go longer than that, and that's fine. Or you can give me like alternatives so we can think that out. But between this week and next week, if you can think about this, just think about it. So when we're sitting, it's coming back to you a little bit more directly. Does that make sense? Okay. On Thursday, Sheikh Fiaz Jafar is going to be starting a halaqa or continuing. He's doing tafsir of Surah Yusuf in this space. You should come to that if you can. Wednesday, the day before, we started last week our food distribution to the homeless in the area. May Allah grant them ease and make us a means of benefit for them. So Wednesday afternoons at 2:30, we do food distribution. Last week we fed 100 people in the area. I think we're going to do a similar amount until we grow it. Pre-COVID, we were doing this twice a week, and then we had to suspend it over the pandemic because of the university's policies. So we want to start building it up. It'd be great if you could come to volunteer for that and be a part of it. And on Friday, other than Jummah, we're going to have lunch this Friday after Jummah that you should come to. I think our students are going to do something to the High Line on Friday. So if you're a student here and you want to go there, we're also going to have one of our candidates come in who is interviewing for an assistant chaplain role. And part of their final round of interviews is that they'll come and they'll do some kind of talk or halaqa. So on Friday, likely at 6 o'clock, we'll have somebody here. It'd be amazing if as many of you as possible can be a part of that. We'll advertise it to our mailing list. But we want community feedback on who it is that we're hiring. And over the course of the next month, we're going to probably have like 6 to 10 candidates that'll come in for interviews in that regard. On Saturday and Sunday, we're going to have another halaqa that is the same class on both days. So it's 2 sections of it. It's just an intro to reading Quran. So it'll start off with just the letters and pronunciation of the letters, recognizing the letters, but then go through the rules of tajweed, work on your recitation. Brother Suhaib, who's here, who shouldn't you be in class right now? Maybe. Oh yeah, not to blow up your spot. He's going to be teaching, mashallah, on Saturday and Sunday. You want to add in anything to that?
Maybe I was speaking to the other day, Saturday, Sunday, it's not mandatory to go to classes, but it's a big concept we talk about.
Yeah, and don't not come because you think you already have like a basic understanding. A part of the adab of ta'aleem in our tradition, the etiquette of learning is revision. You know, so you want to go and go back, and you'll be surprised at what you could kind of deepen and learn. That'll be on Saturday and Sunday from 12:15 to 1:45 here in the Musalla, and we're gonna figure out if we're gonna live stream that or not. But the other halaqas will be live streamed. Then next Friday, September 30th, We're launching a new series. Two of our community members are helping to put together, Fatima and Ihsan Salim. It's the Black Muslim Lecture Series. So next Friday, September 30th, we're going to have a panel with Professor Rasul Miller, some of our local New York Muslim community leaders who identify as Black. Everybody should come to it. The impact, as well as just the longevity of existence of Islam in the United States, let alone in New York, would not be what it is without Black experience and contribution, as well as just